All right, welcome to Chapter 3, the Criminology of Computer Crime. So this is a theory-based lecture. There's a lot of stuff in your book that you're going to need to read. I'm going to caveat some of the highlights of the chapter. We're going to talk, a little bit about more in depth about some of the theories. But for the most part, I want you to read the book and digest the actual theory. Understand how it applies, and like I said, we'll go through and we'll talk about some of that and highlight some of that. I'm even wearing my glasses, so I'm. This is a really smart presentation because I'm wearing my glasses. So, just saying. All right. So, learning objectives discuss the tenets of choice theory, including routine activities theory, its application or to cybercrime. You can read the word. Describe the assumptions of deterrence theory and its utility. Discuss the impact of personality disorder on cybercrime. Okay, we're going to discuss the major social structure theories that apply to cybercrime. Discuss the learning and social control theories. We're going to talk about the relationship between terrorism and political theory. And again, this is very theory heavy, so we're going to spend some time understanding the underlying theory of why people do what they do from a social perspective, from a personal theory perspective, and from a legal theory perspective. The biggest thing in this chapter is it's trying to get at why do individuals commit cybercrime. And there's just so many different ways and reasons why people commit cybercrime. Some people do it because it's easy. It's the easiest to crime. I don't have to go anywhere. I can do it online. Not a lot of risk, especially if I'm good at what I do. So there's cybercrime is not that victim to crime. It's kind of one of those crimes where I can justify to myself that I'm really not hurting anybody by doing what I do. And we'll talk about some of that kind of stuff as we go through the different types of theories here. All right, so kind of coming through the 70s and going to the 80s, you had something called choice theory. And basically what choice theory said is if you if you look at the risk of getting caught and you say, you know what, the benefit outweighs that risk, I'm going to go ahead and do it. You've made a choice. Or if you look at something and say, hey, there's way too much risk in that, I'm going to get caught, I'm not going to do that. All right. This was the theory that really questioned what we call the positive school, the rehabilitation school of thought, which was, really thinking that rehabilitation was the only way to look at crime, that everything was rehabitive and not everything is. And the crime rates in the 60s and 70s significantly increased. So they're looking at how they were treating crime and punishment, and they were trying to figure out, well, what's going on here. And choice theory came to light, and basically what choice theory said is, people are going to make a choice. They're going to look at whether something is worth doing. So this is where your 3 strikes law came into play. So, you give that person something to think about. You take away some of their choice. Mandatory sentencing. You carry a gun, you go to jail. Those are all things to deter that choice. And these are all policies and programs that were put into place. I mean, you could kind of think of it in your own way. We make choices every day. Do you want to make a left or a right when you go to work? If you have that option, which is going to be quicker, get on the freeway or stay on a side road. I mean, do I pass this person or not pass this person? I mean, we're making choices all the time. So human nature is choice based. We're nodal in that fashion. We have a positive and a negative response. We're constantly making those choices or decisions. Computers are choice based. It's either on or off. Logical on, logical off. So the computer models, as general system theory suggests, models the biology or the biologic elements of our world. They very much apply to how we look at crime and things. So from a basic standpoint, the biology of a person, choice theory really has some merit. And for a long time, it had a lot of merit until it started kind of falling out of favor, and we moved into something called rat theory. And rat basically says there's always going to be a steady supply of offenders who are motivated to commit a crime. Um, rat also says there's going to be a lot of targets, and there's going to be absence of a capable guardian, someone or something that protects the suitable target, okay, from the motivated offender. So in the cybercrime world, you're talking about your firewalls, you're talking about your cybersecurity that's going to protect that suitable target. And the suitable target in our world today, as you'll see as we go through this course, is the population, the people, the density of the online community lends itself to this theory because there's just an ever-increasing number of people that are not situationally aware of what it is they're involved in when they get onto the computer. So a motivated offender, someone who's trying to do fraud or intellectual property thefts, things such as that, has a huge population of people to go after, and they may not have capable guardians in place. So when you don't have that capable guardian, you don't have firewalls, you don't have virus protection, you don't have those things, you don't have an understanding of what it is that's a threat to you, well, then you become a greater risk and you become that target for that motivated offender. And we're going to see this as we go through. You're going to see this when we talk about child exploitation later on, that the absence of a capable guardian, we throw people in front of the TV, or we throw someone in front of a computer screen and we say, babysit my child, basically leaving the guardianship up with that device instead of with the parent. Okay, so all these factors have to be present for routine activities through your rat. Okay, and rat, especially in the cybercrime world, is not going to go away. And the basic reason for that is we have just so many people. The use of zero-day viruses, the use of technology against people that are less technically savvy. So when you look at the world from a systems approach, or you look at the world from a cyber security approach, you have two types, basically two populations of people. You have the digital citizenry, and that's going to be the person that grew up in the digital world, person who is used to the digital world, someone who understands, they have situational awareness, and they're not going to fall for the ploys as much as somebody who's not from the digital world. And that's our second population, which is the digital immigrant. And the digital immigrant are people that are being brought into the digital world, not because they always want to, but they have to, because that's where the jobs are. That's where family photos are. Grandma and grandpa don't get an envelope full of photos anymore. They get told, here's my Facebook page, go check out your grandchildren's latest escapades. So when you have those two citizenries, you have one citizenry which is probably harder to attack, and then you have another right population of potential victims, people that are not prepared to protect themselves in that digital space because they are immigrating. They're learning the language, they're learning the customs, they're learning how to write, they're learning all the things that they have to learn to be a part of this digital world that most people are a digital citizen of. So when those immigrants come in, those digital immigrants come in, they're not prepared in many cases for the threats that exist in that world where the digital citizenry are. And this is also going to be something you're going to deal with when you're writing cybercrime policy and things later on in your careers, is you're going to have to take into consideration the aged. You're going to have to look at people like me who grew up without computers and didn't understand the use of technology like my son does today. You're going to have to write policy for me. Unfortunately, I'm in the leadership positions now, so I'm writing policy, and unfortunately, my policy is not always going to provide a capable guardian because I may not understand what it is that I'm writing. I think it might protect, but I may not have all of that understanding of how to write rules that best protect the the complex nature of a business environment or government environment, or even in the home environment, which is becoming much more technical and much more complex and complicated. Deterrence theory. So you're going to have two components of deterrence theory. But deterrence theory argues that offenders commit crime because they make a choice to do so. Okay, so it's much like choice theory. Okay, rational choice theory says you're going to weigh the benefits, and if the benefits outweigh the risk, you're going to be deterred from that criminal act. So in this, you have two specific areas that are identified. You have general and you have specific deterrences. So general seeks to deter anybody from committing crime. And this is where you have 3 strikes and all that kind of stuff. But then we also have specific deterrence. So we impose sanctions on people that go to jail, and we make leaving jail unpalatable as well. So when someone comes out of jail, even though they've done their time and their sentence, they still might be on parole. They might be on some type of a list, a offender list. That's designed to remind that person not to commit that crime again, and it's added onto that level of choice as a deterrence to that choice theory of saying, I'm going to go ahead and commit a crime, and then they go, well, I am on parole, and if I violate my parole, I'm going to jail for 10 years by doing this one act, and it's just not worth doing this one act. The general deterrent seeks to deter an entire population or larger populations. Okay, deterrence theory also makes some assumptions, and I'm sure you all heard the thing, and assumptions are bad, but these generally play pretty well. The individuals are typically rational actors, not always. If you're talking about the criminally insane, people with mental health issues, things such as that, they may not be rational actors. They may not look at the rules the same way that other people. So they might not understand the longevity of parole. That might not be a deterrence to them. Offenders are aware of the penalty for a particular crime. They're going to get told what a crime is, but then they start watching things going on in the news, and they notice that white-collar criminals and computer criminals do either probation or a lot less time than someone that walks in and commits a crime with a gun. Now, we might be deterring gun violence, but we might be, by deterring the gun violence, increasing our cyber crime. Again, we're still going to have a motivated population of offenders, of criminals that are still wanting to commit crime. Offenders view the risks as unpleasant, and that would be a generally across the board statement, again, unless you're dealing with people that don't know how to rationalize the severity of a crime. Sanctions are swift, certain, and severe. Doesn't happen that way. Plea bargains, mitigating circumstances, hanging judges, and cupcake judges. Ones that let everybody go because they feel bad for everybody, and ones that if you do anything wrong, you deserve to go to jail for the rest of your life. And you have this latitude in the judicial system where you have these judges that are known for how they rule. I remember in our jurisdiction we had a couple like that. And if you were going in front of one judge, you basically were going to end up letting the guy was going to walk. You knew he was going to walk. But if you went to this other judge, it was a pretty good chance the guy was going to go to jail for a very, very long time, especially with child pornography and things such as that. Now, even the cupcake judges in child pornography tend to be a lot more strict, but there are some that, again, see other circumstances that have made that person into who they are. For us to really deter though people, we have to have capable guardians. We have to have enforcement of the law. And the problem we have with that is, as the population explodes on the internet, you still have a very finite population of police. So as this expansive arena grows with all the new toys and all the new tools and all the new stuff, it doesn't mean that your population of police are growing. It just means that your potential for crime has grown. Okay, so that's one of the problems we have is, yeah, they might have a great law on the books, but everybody kind of chuckles and says no one's ever going to get caught. And I'll give you a classic example of that. And you can probably go back into your own lives and remember this. I used to have a video collection, and in my video collection I had VHS tapes. And in my video collection, at the end of the videos, I could get 3-4 movies to a tape. You can get one of those 12-hour tapes. I could get 3-4 movies on there. At the end of the movie, it would always play this thing, says the FBI says this is illegal. Don't copy it. You can't use it. We're gonna put you in jail. And you'd see that and go, that's pretty funny. So there was no fear of that label. No one ever, or people didn't stop recording things because of that label. All right, people were not incarcerated because you couldn't incarcerate the number of people you'd need to incarcerate to make that rule actually work. All right, so again, laws, if they don't have teeth, they just become either a joke or a meme or something else, and no one really cares. Moral development of crime. So we talked about some of the action theories of why we do what we do, choice and rat and deterrence, and we look at the law and how the law can keep us from doing those things. But there's also theories that say, well, how did we get here? How did we create people that want to commit crime? You know, where does that come from? How do we not have that? Maybe we should start at the very beginning and teach people not to be social criminals or have issues that need to be identified early, so psychological issues. We're talking about that now because of all the shootings and all the things that have happened in the last couple of years. Everybody's talking about mental health and background checks and things that could potentially make things better, or they could potentially make things worse, depending on which camp you come from on that argument. But you start looking at, well, how if we go back and if we could identify that person that's going to hold a gun that's going to kill somebody, and we can identify that person early, if we could do that, well, then maybe we could change something. You know, the thing about the whole gun debate, and this is by no means going to get political at all, trust me. The whole thing about gun debate is 4 elements make up a gun crime: a person, it's an offender, a gun, a bullet, and a victim. Those are the 4 elements that make up every gun crime. So if you can affect any one of those 4 elements, and we're probably never going to get rid of victims because victims is going to be a victim. Depending on how the statutes and political parties go, we may or may not ever see an eradication of guns. I doubt seriously that'll ever happen. So if we could somehow find the offender early, well, then we could stop the other 3 from happening. So if you take any one of those pieces out, you know, you stop a gun violence. You can't have the gun violence without one of those, well, without all 4 of those. So identifying early people with mental health issues, things like that, and keeping guns out of their hands is a good way of understanding this theory of moral development. So as a society, we're looking for a way of protecting victims from people that may not see the seriousness of the criminal act they're about to commit, for example. Colbert comes in with basically 6 stages of moral development. It's your punishment and obedience stage. You're talking about very early on, you're a child or in that child state. You do something wrong, and you're going to be punished for it. Okay, dad comes in with a belt, and or mom comes in with a spoon or a belt, and you're going to receive some type of punishment. So if you're looking in your book on page 54, you have these 6 stages, and when we look at these 6 stages or these developments of cognitive understanding, this is the growth of a person. They go through these different stages, and age has a lot to do with the stage they're in. So punishment and obedience, you can imagine, is a very early on stage. The hedonistic, okay, it says the right to correspond, seeing one's own needs met. Okay, so it's a very selfish stage. I do things for myself. I do things because I want to. I want something. Okay. Interpersonal concordance. You're doing things that you think are right. Good intentions. Law and order stage. Basically, you're doing the cops and robbers thing. Social contract, legalistic stage. Now I'm obeying the rules of my society. Okay. And then orientation to universal ethical principle stage. And this is where we see people at kind of towards the end, or not the end of their lives, but in a more mature state in their lives. Some people get there earlier than later. And this is, they call it biblical law sometimes. And what they mean by that is every human knows inside of them that murder is wrong. Okay? Everybody identifies murder as being something, a rational person here identifies murder as being wrong. That's a universal ethical principle. So there are certain things that we agree upon within our society that you should not do. Personality disorders. There are certain personality disorders that will shield people from prosecution. Psychologists argue that personality influences crime. I agree with that. I've seen enough people that have had personality issues. I remember a Greyhound bus showing up and watching the video, and the driver came running off the Greyhound bus, followed by 10 or 15 other people, and we got a report at the sheriff's department that there had been a crime committed on the bus. There had been a stabbing. And when we got there, there was a gentleman sitting in a bus seat. He was a little agitated because the bus hadn't gone anywhere, and he was on a time schedule. He needed to get to where he wanted to go. And seated next to him was a victim, a dead person. It's funny. He called me Big Country. I got on the bus. He's like, "Hey, Big Country, are you gonna get this bus moving?" He had no association with what was going on. And I said, and I asked him. I said, "So, we got him up and we got him in handcuffs. We took his knife away from him. And he was absolutely docile. No issues." And he said, as he was coming off, he said, "I didn't mean to kill Ronald Reagan, but I just hated Ronald Reagan, and it was just so crazy. He's sitting next to me on the bus. I just had to kill him." That was his defense, and he went to court based on the Ronald Reagan defense that he killed the guy because it was Ronald Reagan. So there's gonna be personality disorders. There's gonna be things that people. They have a break, that their brains don't function like everybody else's brain, and there are going to be disorders that cause people to do weird things in our society, and unfortunately, they are able to get a hold of tools that can wreak havoc in our society, and that's something that we have to look at as a society. Things that personality characteristics that go into crime: extroversion, being out there, impulsivity. This is where you're just impulsive. You do something crazy. You've probably done something where it was probably maybe against the law, but it was an impulsive thing. You just had to do it. Some people call it the red light syndrome. It's a green light. You see it go yellow, and impulsively you hit that that pedal because you're going to beat that red light. You know, if you hit the red light, you've broken the rules, or you've broken the traffic regulations. But you're going to take that chance because it's just impulsive. It's something I need to do. Lack of self-control. Not being able to control themselves. And they say that by the age of 8, people are trained in self-control, and after 8 and moving through, psychologists say that people have formed their self-control. So it's those early years that are extremely important to a child, where they learn that self-control in our society. Resentment, suspicion of others, destructiveness. These are all those overt acts you're looking for. Less fearful of failure, ambivalence towards authority. I don't care. Some people call us the James Dean approach. Hey, I'm the guy wearing a leather jacket, and I don't care about the law. And that was that's seen as cool. Okay, that someone can take on the police. Okay, and it has really turned this line here is actually what has turned a lot of people adversarial in that police relationship. Police are in a lot of times reactionary to something that happens to them, and they end up in a really bad situation, kind of an upside down society for them, because they should be respected. They should be the authority that comes in and says, hey, stop, and everybody stops. But when you have people that don't care about the authority, don't respect the authority, then people are able to challenge the authority, and that can be very destructive in crowd situations, or criminal or crime, because it escalates the response. And a lot of times, as we all know, when that response is escalated, it leads to catastrophic consequences by in a lot of times. Assertiveness, and then the feeling of being unappreciated in a society. No one cares about me. I'm just here because I'm just a drone in the workforce, and you go through those types of kind of mentalities. Psychology theory is an attempt to explain pedophilia. I don't jump on board with a lot of the pedophilia theory, only because I've seen quite a bit, and I've seen why people do some of the things they do, and it's not always the abused kid that turns into the predator later on. It's not always the person that comes from a bad home. A lot of it comes from power, psychological thing, but a lot of it comes from power and not some prior abuse. That has become a crutch of many prosecutions, and it becomes the immediate thing that a defense attorney goes to is, oh, they were abused as a child, so they're just acting out now. And that is something that I would like to see changed, personally. No one really understands when people become a pedophile. First of all, you've got a huge population of children online. You've got an offender who's committed to seeking out children, and you have less capable guardians. Parents turn a blind eye. Network security might not be that great on their devices or machines, and the monitoring software run by ISPs may or may not exist. It may be completely non-existent in many cases. All right. Many of the pedophiles, they're exposed to some type of childhood treatment. Absolutely. I'm not going to dismiss that, but it's not the only reason why. The woe is me, the poor me. It really comes down to a power thing. When you sit down and you interview pedophiles, and a lot of times you'll find them as being power or in a position of power. Talked to people that were clergy. We've talked to people that were in state government. We've talked to people that were in city government, and you find that people were in positions of power. Fathers were in position of power, and then all of a sudden their child grew up and moved out, and that father no longer had power, and then acted or took their acting out onto the internet. there's a process, there's a cognitive reinforcement, there's a learning curve for the predators. They don't just go out and click the button and boom, they're out on the web and they're committing a crime. There's a slow stepping through in the water to see, whether or not they're going to get caught. So a predator might send a young 20-year-old pornography picture to someone and see what happens. Then they'll send a 19, and the age will drop lower and lower and lower until they are doing child pornography. So they're testing the waters. They're seeing, and from that they're learning. They're growing in their boldness because now their choice is being changed. So choice theory comes into play when you start talking about this. So the theories we talked about in the very beginning now start coming back, and we start seeing them play out in the psychological theories. The thing is, are they all rational thinking people? Okay, and there are some schools of thought that say no, they're not rational thinking people. Some schools of thought say they are. They just have the disposition for pedophilia. And that is something that society is having to understand and learn. They have sex offenders lists which have been abused, and basically they try to use them as deterrents, but then it got kind of crazy where people were pleading out and getting put on lists. I remember a kid in Seattle. He exposed himself. It was a drunk weekend. He was going to a university up in Seattle, and he exposed himself, and they ended up putting him on the sexual predator list because he exposed himself while he was intoxicated, basically in a park. Now, does that mean that he wasn't doing something criminal? No, not at all. In fact, he was. But did he need to go on to the sex offender list for the rest of his life? Probably not. I don't think that's the appropriate thing to do with somebody that was, out with the guys on a drunk weekend and did something stupid. I'm sure there would have been other methods of helping that kid deter from his actions in the future, and that was not one of them. The only reason I know about him is because I met him later on. He was about 43 years old. He was homeless. He couldn't hold a job anywhere. Everywhere he went, he had to report himself. So he came to the sheriff's department and registered that he was from the sex offenders list. And we got into a conversation. He told me why he was on the list, and that made no sense to me. Social structure theories. Social structured theories, they look very heavily at impoverished, lower class, people that don't have a lot of means are looked at as a group that is struggling to better themselves, and crime is a way of bettering themselves. It falls into strain theory. So when you strain something, it's just like anything else. If you push the limits, eventually something breaks. And a lot of the social structure theories come from this belief that there's strain in lower class individuals that are seeking the same opportunity in our society, and it causes a desire to get to that level. And the only way they know to get to that level, because they don't see themselves in a position of circumstance to get themselves out of the position they're in, is to commit crime, financially or some other means. So when you have these social structure theories and you have this social structure, it also becomes a great excuse for a lot of people. There are many examples of people that have lifted themselves up by their bootstraps and moved on and had successful careers and done well with their lives. And then there's people that you meet that say, nope, society was bad to me, so therefore I took it out and I took it to the man, and they deserve what they got. Okay, so strain theory it's an interesting theory. It provides a lot of excuses, and it also provides an understanding of why people are frustrated, why people get to the point of being frustrated, and how maybe a deterrence law could be assisted by other programs that help people that are motivated to leave that environment, move into a school or education program that gives them those abilities or those skills that they need to be successful in society. So, deterrence might not be the best application here for the prevention of crime. Other programs might be empowering programs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, YMCA, mentoring programs have all been phenomenally good programs that have helped lots and lots and lots of youth move out of what they thought was a locked system and become successful, which kudos to them. String theory really saw crime as a lack of opportunity. It was a result of lack of opportunity. You have Merton's strain theory, who basically says, if you don't have an opportunity, you're going to get mad and you're going to commit crime. I mean, that's really what Merton's theory boils down to. If you don't have any opportunity to get out, and you're frustrated with that opportunity, you're going to end up breaking out of that somehow, and that somehow might be through crime. The goal is reached through accepted means such as education, occupation, deferral of gratification. A lower class has less access to education and jobs in the economic or into society. So therefore, strain theory is called blocked opportunity sometimes, where you keep a group of people in a specific environment so that you can abuse them for low paying jobs, menial work, things such as that. And that's something that we have to make sure that we're very cognizant of in our society, is not allowing those things to happen where you have groups of people that are maintained in a group or in a physical area, because it's something that just is against everything that we believe in, and it actually causes increase in crime. Merton has 5 modes of adaptation. These are ways that people deal with this: strain theory, conformity, ritualism, in other words, lowering the standard, and basically being more religious and accepting their position, and then making that into a motivator. Innovation, seeking ways of coming out. Cybercrime comes from that innovation in a lot of times, where people find a way to gain something from a mistake or misconfiguration or a bad product that's put out on the web that opens up a hole that someone can get into. Retreatism, don't care, just leave me alone. World's never going to change. I am who I am, and I'm just stuck with my lot in life. And then rebellion, where they take an active role and they see the good intention as being the right thing. Rebellion is seen as a positive and not a negative, depending on which side of the rebellion you're on. If you're being rebelled against, well, then everybody's a terrorist. If you're part of the rebellion, well, then you're a patriotic fighter fighting the oligarchy or whoever it is that you are attacking. So you have 2 different viewpoints from that. And then, again, who owns the news, owns the message, owns the narrative, and you're going to be told what you need to hear through social media. So cybercrime and the control of the message is also a part of this. It's all interrelated. That the presence of message, the presence of controlling what people think, is all a part of that cybercrime, and it goes into this strain. People prey on people that are in strained situations to energize them to do things that they may not do without provocation. And that is also becoming a defense claim as people are going to trial for things they've done bad things they've done the society. White collar criminal. The white collar criminal, or somebody that is in a position of control and power within a network or something such as that, where they see money as being a way of keeping their status. White collar crime is really driven by the maintenance of perceived wealth. If I'm successful and wealthy, I gotta remain successful and wealthy no matter what. And that's driven from our capitalistic society. Capitalism is not ethical. Capitalism is not about right and wrong. Capitalism is not patriotic. A lot of people confuse that capitalism with patriotism and ethical. Capitalism has one goal, and please do the research. And if you find me to be wrong here, I'd love to have a conversation with you. But capitalism has one goal, and that is to increase one's wealth in a society. That is capitalism. The society's growth, no matter how you do it, doesn't matter. There's nothing in there that says capitalism without crime or capitalism ethically. It's just capitalism. So if I can make $1 by stealing it, by doing computer crime, I am actually a good capitalist because I am doing that. The mitigators of capitalism are patriotism and ethical behavior and those other things that come in that stop me from being purely capitalistic. So now when I blend those other theories into my capitalist view, and now I have an ethical capitalist, which is kind of a misnomer, but I will make money if it is the right thing to do. Okay? And that's not pure capitalism. Pure capitalism is wealth generation. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And there is nothing in the definition of wealth escalation that says you will do it in a correct, socially approved manner. So white collar crime came from that whole belief that I have to maintain myself. I have to maintain my status. So once I've made my $1 million, I need to keep making $1 million. And I'm going to do that however I need to do it. And that's how people get into that trap. They go out and they buy the big house, big cars. They live on expensive roads and streets. And then all of a sudden they can't afford that heavy burden, and they don't have much choice but to try and make ends meet by doing some type of economic crime. General strain theory comes from Agnew. General strain theory attempts to explain individuals who feel stressed in their lives are no more likely to commit crimes. Agnew argues that crime is due to a negative effect stages, including anger, frustration, depression. And if you go back to Ashcroft and the earlier strain theories, their steps of strain leads to Agnew's understanding that it comes to a boiling point. How does it become a boiling point? Well, you have instigators, you have fuel that goes into that, and that can come from social media, that can come from things that happen within that community. Those can all be things that feed that strain. And once that strain boils, then you have anger, frustration, you have depression, disappointment, and then a lot of it leads to just straight out fear. People are afraid of one another, and that causes great strain. There's a great TED Talk, recommend to anybody that's interested in this stuff, and it's about a black man that joins the Klan, and he does it online. So he joins a white supremacy group, and he doesn't go to meetings, but he actively participates in the forums. And he said, from his experience of being in the Klan, what he understood was the Klan and the neighborhood that he came from, and he came out of LA in what he called an impoverished section of town, what he witnessed from his growing up and what he heard from the Klan members, that they were exactly the same. They both had the same frustrations and depressions and disappointments and anger. It's just they didn't know how to express that to one another because they'd never talked. So they had this great fear of each other, even though both groups had the exact same fear. And they felt put down by general society. It's a very well done TED Talk, and I would very much recommend. If I can find it, I'll put it up on week one. But if not, go on TED and do some searching. You'll find it out in the TED Talks. So if I fail to achieve positive values, if there's a disjunction between what I expect and what I get, if I take away remove positive stimuli, and I present negative stimuli in a more positive light, this is where we're going to get strain. Cyberbullying and stalking is, it says here as an example, and cyberbullying is the negative stimuli. So people are negatively affected by me posting things about them and how we hate that person, and all the negative things that are sent upon that causes that stress and strain on that individual. And that person may end up doing something equally negative in reaction or retaliation, or they may regress. They may just don't care. I'm out. Don't bother me. But more often, people become depressed, and the message starts getting in their head. Nobody likes you. You're just lost to society, and much harsher things than that, obviously. But that then leads to this depression, and this depression then leads people to do crazy things because of the depression, killing themselves. Young kids taking their lives because they've been removed from social media. First time I ever heard that, I'll talk about this later on, but first time I ever heard that, I could not understand why anybody would kill themselves because they lost their social media. It made no sense to me whatsoever. Again, law enforcement is not trained for this. Law enforcement is not trained for most of what we're talking about. Law enforcement doesn't see, because they are also strained, and they also have their own strains going on within their organization, which is then negatively impacts the society around them. Social process theory. These theories analyze the impact of certain factors such as peer groups, relationships, family relationships, failure in school to explain and provide a solid understanding of why people shouldn't do things. So the social process theories look at how we grow in our society. How do we cognitively change within our society? How do we move from one point to another point? And one of the theories is learning theory. And according to learning theory, individuals commit crime, including computer crime, because of these learned attitudes. If your dad's a skilled hacker, you're probably going to grow up in a house and learn how to run Linux and how to hack and do those kinds of things. If your dad is a great lock thief, you're probably going to end up being a good lock picker yourself. The learning and the training of skills and rationalizations are passed on from one group to another group. And learning theory is used a lot when they talk about things, something called generational welfare. I had the experience of actually talking to a young man at length one time, and I was asking about school, and I was asking him, what how he was going to, take care of his family. He had several kids at that point. 22 years old. He'd done 2 years in jail or prison, and again, talking to him about what he was going to do, his next steps. And he said, the hardest thing is when he goes home, he's going to start talking to all the people around him and the people around him and say, don't get a job, you're not going to make any money. The government will pay you not to work. And you're going to make more money not working than if you just take the welfare check. And he said that his parents were on welfare, but their parents were also on welfare. And he said he probably unknowingly, he didn't say it in this terms, but he said unknowingly he's probably teaching his kids to be on welfare. So it's that passed on generational mentality of don't go to school, stay where you are, make the money off the government, live a happy life. If you don't have goals, then you're never going to fail. And this kid was telling me all about this kind of mentality he had. He had learned that, by not having goals, he was disappointed. He didn't have a high school education. Didn't need one. You don't have to have a high school education to get welfare. Makes plenty of money, and that and doing the crime that he did, he told me that he'll probably spend during his life 15 to 20 years in jail. But he said he'll probably break it up, so it's not going to be so bad. Rationalization. Accepting his state in life, which goes back to what we were talking about in the psychological theories. People that resign themselves to being in a position and give up moving forward. They turn to crime because crime is going to be something that keeps them in that position. A lot of times the learning takes place with peers and brothers and sisters, but the lion's share of it comes from the parent, whether the parent is trying to teach him or not. The parent is the one that's going to be the most influential person, negatively or positively, on that child. Sutherland argued that criminal behavior is a function of learning, not the inability of economic success. And I'm really in that school of thought because I've seen people that didn't grow up in the greatest of circumstances have very successful careers and lives. I have several friends that are owners of companies, and they came from very dire situations, but they attribute their growth to those dire situations. They strove harder in their life not to be where they were. They wanted something better, not illegally, but they were determined to get their high school diploma, their education, and then strive out into the world and make something out of themselves. So Sutherland basically also posed, 9 propositions that demonstrate the social learning. One, that criminal behavior is learned. Criminal behavior is learned in interaction with other persons in a process of communication. The principal part of learning of criminal behavior occurs within small, intimate, personal groups. We're talking about gangs. We're talking about, subcultures within a culture. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Criminal behavior is learned through, which includes techniques for committing the crime, skills, tradecraft, specific directives or directions of motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes. Many criminal organizations or familial criminal organizations have a lawyer that they all use, have things in place, have doctors and folks they can go to that don't report certain types of injuries. They have these pre-positioned mechanisms to allow them to be a part of our society, interact with the society, but not trip any of the known red flags or alerts within our systems that would allow law enforcement or some other agency to be involved. Specific direction of motives, drives is learned from definitions of legal codes, favorable and unfavorable. So they define why are you going to do what you're going to do? Well, what is the benefit of what you're doing? They give a definition to the crime. They give a justification to the crime. A person becomes a criminal because of the excess definitions, favorable violations of the law over definitions of unfavorable. So they undermine the deterrent rules. They're the first ones to point out. Do you see what happened? He didn't use a gun. He used a computer, so he didn't go to jail. He just got probation. So we need to do everything on the computer. You need to learn the computer, and they push the person to learn computers so they don't get thrown in jail. They just get slapped on the wrist because they're doing computer crime instead of doing something that involves a gun or something like that. Differential associations may vary in frequency, duration, priority, and intensity. The process of learning criminal behavior by association with criminal patterns, which involves mechanisms that are involved in like any other learning. If you learn to shoplift at a very young age because you need food, then that becomes a pattern in your life. If you are taught to shoplift and you're told it's okay because we need to feed ourselves, that becomes a pattern in your life. If your parents give you permission to commit a crime, that develops a pattern in your life. And then criminal behavior, it's an expression of general needs and values. It's not explained by those, since non-criminal behavior is an expression of the same needs and behavior. So again, this is almost a choice theory at the parental level, where the parent says, you can make a choice. You can either go get a job and be a little hungry for a couple of weeks, but at the end you're going to have money to go buy the food you want, or you can meet your need right now, just go steal the food. You're going to potentially go to jail, but what's the likelihood that anyone's going to catch you stealing? You're faster than the person in the store. The Walmart greeter is not going to run after you, and you're going to get away with the crime. So they teach people, how do you avoid the cameras? How do you do those types of things? And how do you work together as a team from a family unit perspective? Sutherland did not explain how behavior is learned, but Akers attempted to bring in social learning theory. He basically had four principles of this, which was differential association, definitions, differential reinforcement, and imitation. Okay, so as you're looking through the book, and when you get into these associations, you're going to notice that these have a lot to do with the 9 components that Sutherland had, and Akers added to that and basically defined out from Sutherland's theory the basically 4 components that he believed were critical in the computer crime or the generation of crime. Sykes and Matza techniques of neutralization drift theory. Sykes and Matza argued that the process of becoming a criminal is a learned experience. Again, going back to Sutherland, going back to Akers. According to theory, most criminals hold conventional values, norms, and beliefs, but must learn to neutralize those. So, yeah, you're told not to murder, but it's okay if it meets a greater good for your immediate group. So you're taught how to neutralize the effect, or neutralize the gravity of the crime. It's okay if it's a very selfish viewpoint. It allows people to drift. A lot of predators use this drifting to allow them to move into doing computer crime. It's not their fault. They got on the internet. It's the internet's fault. If children weren't supposed to be abused, they wouldn't be out on the internet. Crazy thoughts like that. But they neutralize. They come up with reasons why it's okay. The 5 techniques of neutralization: denial of responsibility. Not me. I have no responsibility to worry about the commission of that crime. Nothing really happened. My crime didn't do anything to anybody. Wasn't my fault. I was forced to do it by some other mechanism. And these 5 techniques of neutralization, even though we talked about the first one, these 5 together are, if you look at any defense case, the defense case is going to roll these 5 out and they're going to see which one the jury goes to, and they're going to stay with that theory. Denial of injury. They didn't get hurt. It wasn't me that caused the injury. I didn't steal the money. Who knows what happened? Denial of victim. There was no victim. I'm the victim. I'm the one who's going through all this. Poor me. I'm the one that's getting the problem. Condemnation of the condemners. It wasn't. It was her. It was him. You see what they were wearing? They were telling me by their physical actions, by their dress, to do something bad to them. They gave me the ability to do what I need to. It's all on them. Or appeal to a higher loyalty. My religion says that I had to do what I did. I stole the money because I'm going to give it to the poor, and that's my religious belief, and therefore you, in the mere mortal court, don't really have jurisdiction over what I did because it was for a higher or a greater good. This is also sometimes called the potluck dinner excuse set. And the potluck dinner excuse set goes that someone loans you a crock pot, and when you give it back, the handle's broken. The person calls you and says, hey, the handle on my crock pot's broken. Well, you have three defenses. One, no, it's not. The handle's not broken. Two, well, you gave it to me broken. Or three, you broke it. I had nothing to do with it. You're just trying to make me pay for something that's not mine. And defense attorneys love those three because they can play those to the juries, or excuse me, the defense attorneys love those because they can play those to the juries, and the juries will pick up on one of those, and then the defense attorney will run with that theory, trying to get the jury to agree that their individual didn't do something based on that theory. Again, it only takes one, jury nullification, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Subculture theories. This is where you have a set of values, norms, or beliefs that differ from your dominant culture. So your normal society thinks one way, but you have a subculture that may believe in the same things as the dominant culture, but there's also differences that allow them to commit crime. For example, we may have someone that is very loyal to the United States, patriotic. And the reason that they're going to do a terroristic act is because of a belief that the country has been attacked by a group that is bad for the country. So I use my subculture within the culture as my value set that allows me to do what it is. It justifies basically what I'm going to do. Gangs and the formation of crime syndicates all come from this subculture mentality. And subcultures form their own rules, their own mores, and of the society that they are a part of. And when you have those subcultures become so dominant in someone's mind, it's very difficult for them to leave that subculture and join the culture that they exist under. It's very, very difficult. Hackers and learning theories. Again, when you start talking about hackers, you start talking about cyber criminals. These are people that believe in technology. They like secrecy. They dwell on the mastery of what they do. Those are all enticing things that bring, and they are a subculture, that bring them together to attack the culture or the groups within the culture that they see as adversarial. They are doing the right thing. Most hackers will tell you, I'm not here committing crime. I'm here because the people need to know about Evil Corp and the bad things that Evil Corp is doing, or there's a firewall that doesn't work and no one's going to tell anybody about it. So I'm going to expose this firewall, and this is why I'm hacking this firewall or this company, is to show and expose the weakness in that security. So hackers have their own subculture, and again, it's a learned theory. You go onto these forums and boards and you learn from other coders. There's some, I don't want to call them hacking schools. I mean, you have some that advertise themselves as hacking schools, but anybody that becomes a really good coder is a good hacker. Anybody that can write script, anybody that can write programming language can be a good hacker. It all depends on what they do with their skills. Virus writers are nothing more than coders, people that have learned to write operational code that has a payload or affects a computer system in a negative form. Social control theory. Why don't individuals commit crime? Assumes that people will violate the law. It answers that lies in the strength of individuals' ties to conventional individuals of a society. Basically, in social control theory, it's what's keeping us from doing bad things. What does tie us together? What does prevent us from anarchy and the craziness? Why do we have such a strong belief in the rule of law? Who created law, and why does the federal government have power, and why does a police officer have power, and who gives all these people power? And it really delves into those types of theories. Who controls that thought? And the interesting thing about this social control theory is how social media is now a part of that social control theory. We watch news that makes us happy. We don't watch news to watch news. We watch news that tells us we're good and correct and we're doing the right thing. If I can make my news, or if I can make my social media tell me I'm doing the right thing, that builds into my subculture within that society and that social control of that group. It says, hey, you're doing the right thing, even though we might be doing the wrong thing. Control of a group through the power of communication and information is very easily done. It's the first thing anybody does when they take over a country is they kill the newspapers, take over the radio, because it's communication that destroys the ability for an aggressor force. We learned this in Turkey when Turkey had its revolution a couple of years ago. The plan was to follow the old Soviet playbook, and you put the army in the intersections around the city. When the city wakes up in the morning, people get up to go to work. All of a sudden, there's a military force there. Erdogan is taken in handcuffs out of the palace. You have a military appearance. They then elect another person into power, and you have a new government. Well, that would have worked perfectly well, except for something called Twitter. So the first military person that showed up at an intersection, someone took a picture of it and Twitter and said, hey, how come there's military guys out in my intersection? Then someone else said, oh, I got some military guys out in my intersection. So all this information started to come out. Erdogan was notified. They started this thing at about 11 o'clock. By 11:30, Erdogan had already knew what was coming, had already had time to get a counteroffensive going with the population, got on the radio, got on the TV at 1 o'clock in the morning and told people about the coup attempt. And in the morning, people went to the streets not to go to work, but to march in protest and take on these military people that were in the intersections. Well, the military is a smaller force, and so they fell apart and dissipated, and there goes your coup. So Twitter was able to destroy this coup because it gave information to the people. It decentralized information. If I can control information, I have much more power. Social control is about controlling and centralizing. So we'll talk about social media, and we'll talk more about the control mechanism later. But just remember, the more you believe the things you read on the Facebook, on Twitter, and those things without doing your own research or looking at things that make you not happy. If you watch a news story and you go, oh man, that just gets me going because I know they're not telling the truth, you're probably doing good research because you're watching something that's controversial, which may be actually right. You may not be right, you may be wrong, and in our society today, being wrong is a bad thing, so nobody wants to hear that. So we're just going to believe our Facebooks and all our stuff, and we'll just blindly follow along and do what we're told. Um, Gottfredson and Hershey argue that a person's tendency to commit crime can be found in his or her level of self-control. Yeah, I may want to. I'm sure you've seen those movies where they have that flashback and the guy's beating some guy in the head and then he flashes out of it and they're both standing in front of each other. That's kind of what that self-control is. You may really hate someone, you may really want to do something crazy to them, but you don't, and you walk away mumbling to yourself, talking about the fire you're going to create in the office. Later on, not then, but sometime you're going to come back and there's going to be a fire. Um, that's what these guys are talking about. It's the lack of self-control. When you talk about children watching you, learning in your behavior and learning from you, it's your lack of self-control that teaches children. Um, People that lack self-control are more likely to view pornography online. They're more likely to do piracy. And I know, maybe some of you are out there going, "Oh, whoa, get a little close here." No, I'm saying you're an unself-controlled person, but people that see uh, ways of indulging it in things that they don't have a lot of control over, self-control over, find themselves falling into situations online that may not be the best situation. For example, people, it's well known that pornography websites are littered with viruses and malware, but people will still take the chance of going there because they want to see the porn. They don't have the control to say no. I'm not going to go to I'm not going to go to this pornography site because I know that there's probably something bad there. Um, they'll take that chance and they'll go see what it is that they can see, and then we take a risk on getting that virus because that's what it is. Terrorism and political theory. So basically, terrorism is violence. Um, Terrorism at its core is bringing fear to a mass. So if I can create fear, or if I can create people to not trust in systems in their society, that's terrorism. So if I can make you think that the banks are failing, if I can make you think your political system is falling apart, if I can undermine legal authority, if I can do things like that, that is cyber terrorism. Those are markings of cyber terrorism. If I can destroy a node that takes Facebook out of the world for 48 hours, I think the world would rise up in arms. Those are things that could cause a single incident or a single act that causes fear across a great population. Look at a school shooting. One school shooting, as tragic as they are and as devastating as they are, the amount of people that are killed in that event compared to other events are much smaller. But because of the type of crime and the type of event, that gets a lot of media attention. Um, and there are lots of other shootings and lots of killings and stabbings and things that happen around the country that are not covered because they're not really in comparison to those single events, and those single events then become terroristic. And that's how they put the tag. This person is generating fear. So now kids don't want to go to school. Teachers want to arm themselves to protect classrooms. We have metal detectors on the fronts of schools now. We have all these things that go into place to protect those I guess you call critical infrastructure places. The schools and dams and power plants and all the things in our world that can be attacked by terrorists. So we live in a terroristic world. It is what it is. It's probably no more dangerous now than it was, but because of the way the news covers things and the way events are done in a single instance, they become very well publicized. I spent a lot of time in Europe, and I remember The last time I went to Europe, a guy said, "Oh man, you going to Europe? Wow, it's crazy over there. You see that Paris thing, and guys are running around with AK-47s and killing everybody and doing all this crazy stuff in downtown Paris." And I thought about that, and I was trying to think of another time. So I was trying to kind of put together outside of France, like in Belgium and all these places that I go, and I realized that the perception is so key. So when you're in Belgium, when I was in Belgium, I had a guy say, "Yeah, we were going to go to Disneyland, but we changed, and now we're going to go to Croatia. We're going to go to the shore there because it's just too unsafe in America to go to these amusement parks, these places where lots of people go because of the terrorists." So it's funny how we look at outside and say, "Oh, look at that, man! They got all kinds of terrorists," and people look at us and go, "Oh, look, they got all kinds of terrorists." It's that ability to create an event that affects people. That's terrorism. All right, so this is a pretty important chapter. I want you to read every single page of this chapter. I want you to go through every single page of it, highlight those theories, understand those theories, because this really is the foundation of this course. It's the foundation of your understanding of computer crime. It's your understanding of criminal process. You may read something a little differently than I do, and that's fine. We can have an academic or discussion about that. Just because I'm the professor doesn't mean I'm right all the time. It just means that we get to have an academic discussion, and we can both state our cases and see, if we can influence each other. So this is one of those core, again, one of these chapters that I think are foundational. This is why this is early on in your coursework here. So please make sure you read this chapter. And if you have any questions on it in our online meeting, on our weekly meeting, let's talk about it. Let's discuss it, and let's see if we can come to compromise. All right, so that is it for me. End of this slide set, and I will see you in the next slide set.